When people talk about the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans, the story is often pushed to one of two extremes. In one version, it is simply 500 years of darkness, pure oppression, endless violence, and cultural ruin. In the other, it becomes a nostalgic tale of coexistence and tolerance, as if conquest hardly mattered, and empire offered an easy model of diversity. The sources do not support either simple picture. What they show instead is something harder to summarize, but closer to the truth. Conquest by force, rule through administration, exploitation mixed with cooperation, real diversity under clear hierarchy, and a legacy that remains deeply ambiguous. The Ottoman move into southeastern Europe began in the 14th century, at a time when the region was already fragmented by rivalry, dynastic struggle, and weakening older powers. Byzantine, Serbian, Bulgarian, and other rulers competed, allied, and fought in changing combinations. The Ottomans did not enter a united Balkans and suddenly break it open in a single blow. They crossed the Dardanelles into a political landscape already divided, and they took advantage of that division with speed and persistence. A key turning point came in the 1360s, when Edirne became the main Ottoman base in Europe. That mattered because it signaled more than raiding. It pointed to a permanent political presence. From there, expansion continued unevenly. Some lands were directly annexed. Others first became tributaries or vassals. Local rulers might remain in place if they paid, supplied troops, or stayed loyal. That pattern is important because the empire did not simply impose one fixed model everywhere at once. It often ruled by layering new authority over old structures. This is why the famous Battle of Kosovo in 1389 has to be handled carefully. It was politically important, and later it became enormously powerful, symbolically. But it should not be treated as the single moment when the entire Balkans fell. That is not what happened. After Kosovo, there were still autonomies, vassal arrangements, further campaigns, defeats, reversals, and local adaptations. Myth and later nationalist enlargement have often turned one major battle into a complete civilizational endpoint. The broader history is messier. Another turning point came in 1453, when Mehmed II conquered Constantinople. With the city transformed into Istanbul, the empire gained a stronger imperial center. That gave Ottoman expansion in the Balkans a stable administrative, military, diplomatic, and commercial backbone. The conquest of cities and fortresses still mattered, but empire now rested not only on marching armies. It rested on institutions. This point becomes especially clear when we look at the strongest evidence we have. The sources of government itself, especially tax and property registers, often called tahrir defters. These records do not describe the Balkans only as a battlefield. They show officials measuring and classifying settlements, households, fields, vineyards, mills, dues, and revenues. In other words, Ottoman rule was made durable not just by coercion, but by registration, taxation, and routine administration. The empire tried to know what it governed because knowing made it easier to extract. One central mechanism was the Timar system. Revenues from villages were assigned to office holders, especially cavalrymen known as sipahis, in return for service. Peasants often remained on the same land and continued much of the same agricultural life. But what they produced was now integrated into a military fiscal system. This reduced the need for constant, open violence. If taxes arrived, if order was maintained, if local elites cooperated, the empire did not need to fight every village every year. Stability could serve domination better than terror alone. That did not mean stability felt the same to everyone. Economic life changed. Where taxes had to be paid in cash, village existence became more monetized. Peasants were tied more closely to markets. That could create opportunities, but also new dependencies and risks. A market connection is not automatically liberation. It can also be a more efficient route for extraction. Regional variation is crucial here. Ottoman rule in Bosnia was not identical to Ottoman rule in Bulgaria, Albania, Serbia, Thessaly, the Danubian provinces, the islands, or mountain regions. Terrain mattered. Distance from major routes mattered. Local power structures mattered. Time mattered too. Any broad claim about the Ottoman Balkans has to be followed by three questions: when, where, and for whom. Without those questions, almost every generalization becomes misleading. The position of non-Muslims is a good example. It is well established that Christians and Jews lived under fiscal and legal disadvantage. Special levies, including the jizya, marked that inequality. But tax practice varied widely by region and period, so even here the details matter. The hierarchy was real. Yet it is not established that this legal and fiscal inequality automatically produced mass forced conversion everywhere and always. If that had been the universal pattern, it would be much harder to explain why large Christian populations, churches, monasteries, and Jewish communities endured for centuries under Ottoman rule. This is where another common simplification needs caution: the idea of a timeless, fully formed millet system from the very beginning. As if the empire neatly organized equal minority communities under a stable and enlightened framework. Recognized religious communities certainly could practice their faith and manage many internal affairs. But presenting that arrangement as a complete system of minority equality from the start is too simple. It was hierarchical, evolving, and unevenly applied. If administration and hierarchy formed one side of Ottoman rule, violence formed another, and this is also well supported in the sources. Chronicles, travel accounts, and modern scholarship repeatedly point to plunder, captivity, enslavement, and sexualized violence, especially in campaigns and frontier zones. To acknowledge the administrative sophistication of the empire is not to soften that reality. Expansion was not a bloodless process dressed up later by hostile memory. It involved repeated coercion and human suffering. The Devshirme, or child levy, may be the clearest example of why extremes are so unhelpful. Christian boys were forcibly taken for service connected to the palace, administration, and the Janissaries. That coercive extraction is real and should not be hidden behind romantic language about merit and mobility. At the same time, it is also misleading to describe it as random mass enslavement with no structure and no possibility of advancement. Some of those taken entered powerful institutions and could rise very high. So the Devshirme combined force with opportunity, violence with incorporation. It was neither benign promotion nor a simple chaos of abduction. More broadly, the Ottoman state often worked by turning potential enemies into participants. Local notables, village leaders, clerics, merchants, and soldiers could all be drawn into imperial structures in different ways. Religious hierarchies could be useful to the state. Tax collection often depended on local knowledge. Service could offer advancement. That is one reason the empire lasted so long in the region. It did not survive on battlefield victories alone. It survived by making itself difficult to separate from daily life. By the 16th century, Ottoman rule in much of the Balkans had become more predictable. Predictable does not mean equal or gentle. It means regularized. People knew more clearly who taxed them, who judged them, and what obligations they faced. But that very system came under strain in the 17th and 18th centuries. Pressures changed. Arrangements shifted. Local realities grew more unstable in many places. Then, in the 19th century, national movements and great power politics increasingly eroded Ottoman power. The empire's position in Europe unraveled step by step until it ended almost completely after the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. So how should we judge the Ottoman conquest and rule in the Balkans? The safest answer is also the least satisfying for anyone seeking a clean moral label. The empire was built by war. It exploited the populations it ruled. It imposed legal and fiscal inequality. It used coercive institutions, including the Devshirme. It also governed through records, negotiation, local cooperation, and enduring social diversity. Its breakup did not simply release the region into justice and harmony either. Empire and anti-imperial struggle both produced domination, cooperation, diversity, and violence. That is why source criticism matters so much. Chronicles can magnify heroism or horror. Travel accounts can sharpen difference for effect. Later, nationalist memory can enlarge suffering, victory, or betrayal into timeless truths. And administrative records, powerful as they are, count taxable people and productive land better than fear, grief, or humiliation. No single kind of source is enough on its own. The Ottoman Balkans were not one experience. They were many experiences, changing across centuries and across landscapes. To reduce that history to darkness alone is myth. To turn it into a lost paradise of tolerance is also myth. The record points instead to a harder and more human conclusion. Conquest created structures of rule that were violent, adaptive, unequal, and durable, and the people who lived under them resisted, accommodated, suffered, and sometimes advanced within them all at once. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, enable notifications, and suggest the next topic in the comments.